and welcome to our Assistant Practitioner Team podcast. Today we're going to be looking at the amazing work done by our lovely January 24 cohorts. So my name's Natalie Villanueva. I'm one of the lecturers on the Assistant Practitioner programme and a radiographer by trade, and I'm joined today by Steph, Hayley and Fiona. So I'm going to let the rest of the team introduce themselves. Steph?
My name's Steph. I'm also one of the lecturers on the Assistant Practitioner programme, and I'm also a radiographer.
Fiona?
Hi, I'm Fiona. I am one of the lecturers on the Assistant Practitioner programme and a trained Assistant Practitioner. And we're also joined today by another member of our team, Hayley. So I'll let Hayley introduce herself now.
Hi, I'm Hayley. I'm a senior lecturer in medical imaging. I work on the assistant practitioner course and I lead the radiography specific pathway modules. And I'm also the lead for the assistant practitioner bridging course for the diagnostic radiography apprenticeship pathway.
So today we're going to revisit the Leadership and Management podcast. And instead of focusing on leadership like we did before, we're going to have another look at the students' work, but instead this time we're going to focus on the development of creativity and digital skills that the assessments have shown. So the examples that we're going to use in today's podcast are from our January 24 cohort.
One of the things that the university is really pushing for at the minute is authentic assessments, and I think this definitely covers that.
Yeah, so part of the university's learning, teaching and assessment plan has that big push, as you said, for authentic assessment. They find that it's kind of a key theme for students and for academics as well. But there's been a lot of research surrounding that. They find that learners actually engage more with the assessment tasks when they find them a bit more realistic and more beneficial.
Some of them do, Steph, but some of them can be quite anxious about the editing. So I'm not sure all of them find it exciting, especially those who really struggle with their digital skills.
Yeah, I know I struggle with those digital skills. And when we have to edit the staff podcast, I find that quite challenging at times. But, practice makes perfect.
Yeah, we really have had to practice these a lot, haven't we? And the students, they need to practice a lot, but it really lets them channel their creativity for this assessment, doesn't it? And it makes it much more enjoyable for us when we're assessing them, that we get to listen to these rather than marking a big assignment.
I really like the creative aspect of this, and I think that's really important when you are considering education, that education isn't a one-size-fits-all policy. I've got 2 children, and the way that they both learn is completely different, and they really excel at different things. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that, we have students that are very articulate and very creative that maybe struggle getting their thoughts down on pen and paper. So I really like the creativeness of this assessment. And that leads us into the first one of our podcasts that we're going to demonstrate, which is by one of our students called Scott. And his creativeness in this assessment really blew me away. And his introduction in particular is fantastic. So I'm going to play that for you now and introduce him.
3, 2, 1. You're listening to the Bone to Pick podcast, and we have a bone to pick with you.
Hello everyone to this one-off podcast. I am your host Scott. How does the strategy plan of the trust influence patient care and staff engagement, and are the values set out being kept to a higher standard? So in 2023, we launched our 7-year strategy, Leading in Healthcare, Trust in Communities. We formed it by doing some mass engagement with people who worked in the organisation, with patients, with carers, with people from the community and from other organisations. And the reason we went with the title of Leading in Healthcare, Trust in Communities, I think is fairly obvious, but just to unpack it, people of Leicester deserve to have the best possible healthcare. Trust in communities. I don't think UHL consistently in the past has engaged with the communities. And when I joined, and people like Michelle, who's our Director of Comms, and Rue, who's Director of Health, Quality and Inclusion, we encountered an awful lot of mistrust, a lack of engagement, a lot of communication. So we are an anchor organisation. We employ lots of people from Leicester City and beyond. We want people to feel that they can trust us. Within that, based around feedback, we identified 4 key priorities: high quality of care for all, great place to work, partnerships for impact, world-class research and education. In this section, I will examine Richard's answers to our questions about the Trust and the NHS, do my own research to understand the reasonings behind his views and opinions. Before we even began asking our prepared questions, Richard made a remark during his introduction regarding the challenges facing the NHS. I've chosen to focus on this comment as I found it to be an unexpectedly honest answer and could be insightful. A report by Lord Darcy, referenced by Richard, examined whether the NHS patients were receiving adequate care, the access to service, and the overall performance of the health system. I will cover this throughout my investigations.
So that was such a great piece of work from Scott. I think it was really insightful and really creative. I think it brought out a side of Scott that we wouldn't necessarily see in other forms of assessment. He really thought outside the box with it, brought that creative process, and he considered a lot of really good key points in there. And I think it shows in Scott's overall mark for this, because he's actually achieved the highest mark that he's achieved over the past 2 years as it is. So I think that speaks volumes for him and how well he's articulated himself with this form of assessment.
Do you know what I really like about his voice is so calming, and I think he's got a really good voice and persona for a podcast. He's a very chilled person anyway, but I think this has really given him the opportunity to have a voice and to portray his knowledge in a certain way. So I really enjoyed this one, and the creative side of it as well had me in stitches. I really loved his little intro. It was fantastic.
I agree. That was very impressive. I think as someone who listens to podcasts, I think the audience make that decision about whether they're going to continue listening to that podcast within the first minute or two. So I think for him to be so captivating straight away just kind of jumps out the box and makes you stop and listen and want to hear more, because he is, as you say, really engaging and just really calm and very clear.
Oh, 100%. I think we need him to come and do our intros. It definitely spice it up a little bit.
You never know, he might do a better job.
So another student with a fantastic and really creative introduction was Sian. So going back to what we were discussing earlier when we were talking about those students feeling a little bit anxious about putting together the podcast, I'm sure Sian won't mind me saying that she had some anxiety at the beginning around this assessment. However, she put together a really fantastic piece of work that she should be really proud of. So when she did this, she incorporated music to include an upbeat intro, and then she followed it up with some really insightful information. So we're going to listen to her podcast now.
Hi, welcome to Delving Deeper with a Leader. My name's Sian, and I'm joined by Brandon, the CEO of Calderdale and Huddersfield Foundation Trust. Stay tuned for fresh insight on my leadership questions.
Do you know, I was really surprised to hear this music in Sian's podcast and really impressed by it. I know she'd been really worried about it going into the project itself, about, how to be creative and how to formulate the podcast. So it was really nice to see her, do something a little bit different and put herself out there in that way.
It's good, isn't it? She's obviously researched what makes a podcast good and knows that adding that little snippet of audio in can make a really big difference. I think it's good to see those digital skills develop as well. Obviously, this is not something Sian's done before. So being able to add the music in and edit it and play around with it, she's done a really good job to make it a little bit more interesting and different for her, hasn't she?
Yeah, I know Ali was really proud when she heard it as well. She rang her straight away and was like, that's amazing, well done. So let's listen to her interaction with the CEO now.
Assistant Practitioner apprenticeship's a good addition to the skill mix for teams within the Trust.
I think it's just the practitioner roles and the apprenticeship for people to become assistant practitioners means that we're exposed and get value from people who are going through these training programs. And I have a real view that the jobs that we all do are very practical jobs. So how do we draw people in to be able to deliver on a practical level, but equally develop from an educational and academic level? Would hope that one of the apprenticeships that's training within our organisation at the moment may well be the chief executive of the organisation in years to come. Because I think if you think about a continual life experience, you may start in one place and end up in another. So I think I'm a true believer in the assistant practitioner role and the apprenticeship way of learning. And I would actively encourage it. I think it brings different levels of experience to our teams. I think it speaks to, as an anchor partner, and an organisation that's one of the biggest employers of Kurt Lees and Halifax, it means that we're giving opportunity and hope to the communities that we serve. And I would hope that our patients are being treated by people who live in and amongst them.
Brendan explicitly expresses his support towards degree apprenticeships. Richard's Review 2020 recommended an additional 2,500 APs to support service needs. However, I found only 5 universities are listed by the Society of Radiographers in offering the degree, making it difficult to attain these numbers. Linking to Brendan's belief that not enough people are moving through the training courses. Unsurprisingly, 2023 survey results showed a mere 35.52% agreed there were enough staff at our trust to do their jobs, indicating the necessity for educational providers to expand the availability of these courses. Multidisciplinary teams allow collaborative work between varying skilled professionals to support best patient outcomes. A study by Hayley and McNulty 2019 indicate radiographers leave due to lack of professional development. Nationally, only 55.98% of staff note opportunities to develop their careers.
It's really interesting what Sian says here, that there's only 5 universities that run a programme like this one that align with different organisations like the Society of Radiographers. And what this means for our students is that they can, at the University of Cumbria, they can run straight on to top-up programmes, and it's a fantastic way of people progressing into the chosen fields.
Yeah, of course. So whether that is radiography or nursing or occupational therapy or physiotherapy, it gives some of the students a chance to progress on things that they might not necessarily be able to have done in that traditional undergrad route. It also keeps them in work, doesn't it, for a lot longer. I think the benefit of it being online as well is that the students are continuously working on those digital skills that we've been talking about. So using like Teams and Microsoft Office products and things like that as part of their university day-to-day things.
I think it being online as well sort of helps with what Sian's CEO was saying about it being accessible, and for employers to send students, it's easier, isn't it, than them travelling up and down the country. They can log in online from, the comfort of their own home or from work, wherever they need to do bits of work, so it makes it more accessible.
They're all really worried about doing the podcast until they actually do it, and then they're really relieved that it's been handed in. But then at the end, when they see the grades, they realise the merit of doing it, don't they? And they see the other things that they have managed to achieve, such as improving their digital skills, or just the fact that they've managed to speak to someone like the CEO that they probably wouldn't have had the confidence to speak to before.
Yeah, when do you ever get the chance to speak to your CEO? Not very often, do you? But I think in terms of those digital skills, it's really important because we live in such a digital world at the moment. I was reading an article by someone called Simon Perry who published last year, and he undertook a podcast assessment for an English speaking assessment in Tokyo. He said that it enhanced students' motivation by linking it to real world technology and social practices, and found it gave students a better sense of autonomy and improved things like their overall enjoyment for assessments. Assessments are never enjoyable, are they? But I think that by doing something that is a little bit more creative, it does make it more enjoyable overall.
I remember doing assessments that were like Viber assessments, and they absolutely terrified me. I'd sit there waiting outside the door to go into the rooms for them. And I remember having to search through evidence being there, and then provide like an answer to questions. But the podcast is really good, especially in Sian's case, because it allows her to think about what she wants to say and measure that response from what her CEO said and the evidence that she's found. And it allowed her to like develop that academic voice a little bit more. So it's been really useful for her, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the editing is something that students worry about more than anything, but is really important because it does enhance those digital skills. And Simon Perry's article actually said that the area of the assessment that students disliked out of anything was the editing. But I think it also brings with it real benefits in that if you say something, you can go back and delete it. When we're recording these podcasts, I often have to go back and delete some of the rubbish I come out with. But in terms of doing this type of assessment, you can really hone in on what you actually want to say.
And I think that's a really important point, isn't it? Because if you think about the likes of a Viva, how many times will students come out of that and think, I wish I hadn't have said that, or I wish I hadn't have done that, when actually realistically with this form of assessment, they have that opportunity to, like you said, clip away at it and submit what they want to submit at the end of it, and hopefully be confident about what they've said and kind of have no regrets over that submission, because they're a lot more in control of it than they would be with an oral assessment as such.
Yeah, 100%. I like what you're saying there about, being in control of your own submission. It's really important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on to our last example of the fantastic work that's been produced. We're going to be looking at Ashley's podcast. And the reason that we included Ashley's podcast in particular is because it's a really good example of how he was creative.
Yeah, Ash's editing skills were fantastic in this, weren't they? He really included lots of snippets of music that linked to the discussion. However, because of copyright, we cannot play this in the podcast.
It's such a shame as well that we can't play this because of the music he included. The way that he did it was so creative and it really put a smile on our faces as a team. For example, here where he's talking about improvement and quality in diagnostics, he used a short clip of Britney's Stronger, which you're lucky I'm not going to sing to you right now. But he makes really clever links between the topic and then like the introductory tune that he includes throughout. And we really enjoyed it. So I'm going to play that for you now.
So I don't think I've got any specific concerns about quality in radiology, but I think radiology is really interesting as a service because so much of what we do ends up impacting on radiology one way or the other. And a lot of the conversations we have is how do we understand what all of those demands are on radiology from other services, and we're planning to expand other services, for instance, and often we don't take account of the knock-on impacts in radiology, for instance, because it's going to put more demand on radiology as well. So make sure we get that right so that we have the best radiology, and I think we have got some good radiology services. So how do we make sure we've got radiology services as good as they can be, because they are so critical to enabling everything else that we do to work as well. So I think that's a really important point, and we don't always get those links right and really understand some of those relationships.
Current government Labour has made promises for more scans being available, and the Richards Review 2020 has demonstrated that the country is low on radiographers and APs, assistant practitioners. What are the plans for the Trust to uphold the promises and needs?
Yeah, this is a really important point, especially when we start thinking where we are, because I don't know the numbers now, but as a country, we scan less people than other developed countries as well. So we know we don't necessarily do as much from a scanning point of view as others, and that's been recognised, and there's a real push to increase that. So things like community diagnostic centres, okay, we've got one in Taunton, we're about to open one in Yeovil, are about how do we create that additional capacity so that we can provide more diagnostics to people, basically, because everything we know says the earlier we find out what's wrong with somebody, the more chance of putting that right for them. So that has been a real focus.
Peter addresses that radiology mixes into the needs of other departments. Fernando Ignacio et al. 24 illustrates the complexity of expanding one service, which then promotes the needs of other services to be developed as well. Muskel 2022 demonstrates that the need of the medical imaging has increased, which reflects the King's Fund and the Richards Review, being the chief executive's role to think of what is best for the whole setting and what is best for the patient's journey. Peter spoke about the Community Diagnostics Centre to help combat the increasing demand for scans. This is in line with the Richards Review and Labour's promise. Year 2023 identifies the need to outsource scans to private sectors to support the demand of the NHS. This will help alleviate the backlog and the pressing effects of COVID-19. However, Goodell also questions if they're fit to meet this demand, and will this affect the quality of the service.
Thanks to Ashley for letting us use that. I think as a radiographer, digital skills are really important, aren't they? Because radiography in whole is really digital. We use so many different systems to complete our work. So enhancing these skills right at the beginning of somebody's role as a radiographer, as an AP, is going to really help them in clinical practice too.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks a lot for that, Nat. And thank you all for listening to the podcast this time. Next time, we're going to look at something really exciting that's happening at the university. We've got our first OT pathway that's starting in September. This has taken a lot of collaboration between the OTs and the AP team, but we're really excited to deliver this for the first time. So in the next podcast, we'll look at that role of the AP in OT and therapy and look at what that program entails. And something else that's exciting that's happening in September is the AP team and the AP network are working with the Health Conferences UK, and we're delivering a conference on supporting and developing the role of the assistant practitioner. This is happening on Wednesday, the 24th of September, and it's online. It'd be really fantastic to see some of the APs there and some of the AP students. So if you'd like to book your place for that, please go to Health Conferences UK, and we will all see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.